Descartes sounds like the beginning of intelligence. Question everything. Doubt everything. Don't trust what you haven't proven. It feels like the moment thinking became serious. Like we finally stopped accepting things blindly and started demanding real certainty. And that idea is powerful because it gives you a sense of control. You're no longer just living inside the world. You're stepping back from it, examining it, deciding what deserves to be believed. At first, that feels like clarity. But something changes the moment doubt becomes your starting point instead of just a tool. Descartes wanted one thing: absolute certainty. Something so solid that it could not be questioned at all. And to find that, he began removing everything that could possibly be doubted. Your senses can deceive you. Your thoughts can be mistaken. Even the world itself could, in theory, be an illusion. So he stripped all of it away, layer by layer, until only one thing remained. The fact that there is thinking happening. The fact that there is a mind present. That became the foundation. And from there, he tried to rebuild everything else. But this is where the problem quietly begins, because the way he reached that certainty required him to separate himself completely from the world he was trying to understand. He had to step so far back into his own mind that everything outside of it became uncertain. The world was no longer something directly given. It became something that needed to be proven. Other people were no longer simply there. They became something you had to infer. Reality itself became something you had to justify through reasoning. That shift seems small, but it changes everything. Because once you place yourself inside your own mind and put the world outside of it, you create a gap that is very difficult to close. You are certain of your own thoughts, but everything else becomes something you reach toward. You don't just experience the world anymore. You think about whether your experience is reliable. You don't just see something. You ask whether what you see is actually real. And once that question becomes natural, it doesn't go away. It follows you into ordinary moments. You start noticing it in simple things. The way you trust your senses becomes something you think about. The way you understand other people becomes something you question. Even your own thoughts can start to feel like something you are observing rather than something you're fully inside. This creates a kind of split. Part of you is living, moving through the world, having experiences in a direct way. Another part of you is standing slightly outside, watching, analyzing, trying to confirm that everything makes sense. And that second layer can feel like intelligence. It feels like you are more aware than before, more precise, more careful about what you believe. But it also creates distance, because you're no longer fully inside your experience. You're always in some small way stepping back from it, checking it, measuring it, trying to make sure it holds up under doubt. And that changes the feeling of being alive. Things become less immediate, less grounded, not in a dramatic way, but in a subtle way that builds over time. You begin to feel slightly removed, like there's always a thin layer between you and what is happening. You are present, but not completely absorbed. You are aware, but also slightly detached. This is not something Descartes intended to create, but it follows naturally from the way he set things up. Because once you make certainty the goal and doubt the method, you can never fully relax into your experience again. There's always the possibility that something is not as it seems. There's always a reason to step back and question. And that habit of stepping back becomes part of how you exist. You start needing proof for things that once felt obvious. You start building explanations for things that used to be immediate. You start treating the world as something that has to be confirmed rather than something you're already inside of. And the more you do that, the more complex everything becomes. Because now you have to answer questions that didn't exist before. How do your thoughts connect to reality? How do you know that what you perceive is actually there? How do you move from certainty about your own mind to certainty about anything outside of it? These questions sound abstract, but they don't stay in philosophy. They shape how you experience your own life. Because once you start living this way, you're never fully at rest inside the world. You are always, in some quiet way, trying to secure it, trying to make sure it is real, trying to make sure your connection to it is valid. And that effort never completely ends. That is the problem Descartes started. Not doubt itself, because doubt can be useful, but the idea that you must stand outside the world in order to trust it. Because once you accept that idea, you create a distance that you spend the rest of your time trying to overcome. And the strange thing is, the more you try to fix that distance, the more you reinforce it. Once that distance becomes part of how you think, it doesn't stay in philosophy. It begins to shape the way you move through ordinary life in ways that are easy to miss at first. You still wake up, go about your day, talk to people, make decisions, but something about the experience feels slightly different. There's always a quiet layer of observation running in the background. You're not just living your life. You are watching yourself live it. You notice your own thoughts as if they are objects. You question your own reactions as if they need to be verified. Even simple moments begin to carry this extra weight, because instead of being fully inside them, part of you is stepping back and asking whether they make sense, whether they are accurate, whether they reflect something real. That constant checking creates a subtle tension, not strong enough to disrupt everything, but enough to change how deeply you feel connected to what is happening. This is where the problem grows, because once you start treating your own experience as something that needs to be confirmed, you stop trusting it in the same way. You begin to rely more on thinking about your experience than actually having it. And thinking about something is never the same as being inside it. It creates a gap between you and the moment, a small delay where you process instead of simply respond. That delay can feel like control. It can feel like you are becoming more thoughtful, more precise, more aware. But it also removes something important. It removes immediacy. It removes the sense that you're directly in contact with the world. Everything becomes slightly indirect, slightly filtered through your own analysis. And the more you rely on that analysis, the more natural it becomes. You start to assume that this is the correct way to experience life. That stepping back, questioning, and verifying is what it means to truly understand something. But this way of relating to the world comes with a cost. It makes everything feel less certain, not because things are less real, but because you are constantly placing yourself at a distance from them. This is especially clear in how you relate to other people. Before this kind of thinking, other people feel immediately present. You see them, hear them, respond to them without needing to prove anything. After this, even that connection can start to feel less direct. You begin to think about what they mean, what their words represent, whether you are interpreting them correctly. You're no longer just in the interaction. You are analyzing it while it's happening. And that analysis creates separation. Not in a way that breaks the connection completely, but in a way that weakens it. You are there, but not fully. You are engaged, but also observing. There's always a small part of you that is outside the moment, trying to understand it instead of simply experiencing it. This same pattern shows up in how you relate to reality itself. You stop taking things as given. Everything becomes something you approach through reasoning. You look for explanations, justifications, proofs. You want to know not just that something is there, but why you should trust that it is there. And the more you push in that direction, the more complicated everything becomes. Because now you're trying to build a bridge between your mind and the world. You're trying to explain how your thoughts connect to what exists outside of them. You're trying to prove that your perceptions correspond to something real. And no matter how far you go, that proof never feels completely finished. There's always another question, another doubt, another possibility that things might not be exactly as they seem. This is why the problem never fully resolves. Because it was created by separating something that was originally unified. Your experience of the world was not meant to be divided into a thinking mind on one side and an external reality on the other. But once that division is made, you are forced to constantly reconnect the two through reasoning. And that process never feels complete because reasoning always leaves room for doubt. So you end up in a strange position. You are more aware than before. You question more. You analyze more. But at the same time, you feel less grounded, less certain, less fully connected to the world you're trying to understand. And this is where the deeper consequence appears. It is not just about knowledge. It is about how it feels to exist. Because when you're always standing slightly outside your experience, trying to confirm it, you never fully settle into it. There's always a sense that something still needs to be checked, something still needs to be proven. And that creates a kind of quiet instability. Not enough to stop you from living your life, but enough to make it feel slightly unresolved. You're always reaching for certainty, but never fully arriving at it. And the more you try to secure that certainty, the more you rely on the very separation that prevents you from feeling it. That is the loop Descartes creates. You doubt in order to find certainty, but the act of doubting places you at a distance. And from that distance, certainty becomes harder to feel, even if you can argue for it logically. So you keep thinking, keep analyzing, keep trying to close the gap. And without realizing it, you are reinforcing the very problem you're trying to solve. And this is where everything needs to turn, because if you stay inside this way of thinking, the problem never really ends. It just becomes more refined. You get better at analyzing, better at questioning, better at building explanations, but the distance remains. In fact, it often grows. You become more certain in your reasoning, but less certain in your experience. You can argue that the world is real, but it doesn't feel as immediate as it once did. You can explain your connection to reality, but you don't feel fully inside that connection. That is the strange result of starting with doubt. It promises certainty, but it slowly replaces direct experience with continuous verification. And verification never fully settles anything. It always leaves a small opening for doubt to return. No matter how strong your argument is, you can still step back and question it again. And once that habit is built into the way you think, it doesn't switch off. You're always one step removed, always able to question again, always able to pull yourself out of what you are experiencing and look at it from the outside. At first, this feels like control, but over time it begins to feel like disconnection, because being fully alive requires a certain kind of trust, not blind belief, but a willingness to be inside your experience without constantly stepping outside it. A willingness to see, feel, and respond without needing to prove every layer of it first. And that is exactly what this framework makes difficult. You're trained to step back, to doubt, to verify. And in doing that, you weaken your ability to simply be present. This is why the problem Descartes started is not just philosophical. It is something you can feel in your own life. It shows up as overthinking, as hesitation, as the need to check and recheck what you already know, as the inability to fully settle into a moment without analyzing it. It shows up as a quiet gap between you and your own experience. You can see it in small things. You enjoy something, but part of you is already thinking about why you enjoy it. You talk to someone, but part of you is analyzing the interaction while it is happening. You make a decision, but part of you steps back to question whether it was the right one. There's always this second layer, and that second layer feels intelligent, but also keeps you from being fully involved. This is the real cost of turning doubt into the foundation of everything. It doesn't just help you avoid mistakes. It makes it harder to fully commit to anything, because commitment requires a kind of acceptance. Not perfect certainty, but enough trust to move forward without constantly pulling yourself back. And when you're always aware that things could be otherwise, that your perception could be mistaken, that your reasoning could be incomplete, that trust becomes harder to hold. So you stay in motion, but with hesitation. You engage, but with distance. You live, but with a part of you always observing from the outside. And that creates a life that is careful, controlled, and intellectually consistent, but also slightly disconnected from its own depth. This is where the limitation becomes clear. Descartes was trying to build a foundation for knowledge. But in doing that, he changed the relationship between you and the world you're trying to know. He made certainty something that must be constructed rather than something that can be felt directly. And once certainty becomes something you have to build, you are never finished building it. There's always another question, another doubt, another reason to step back, and that means you never fully arrive. The way out of this is not to reject thinking or pretend that doubt has no value. The problem is not that you question things. The problem is making questioning the place you always stand. Because there's another way to relate to your experience. Not by stepping outside it first, but by starting inside it. You see something, and instead of immediately asking whether it is real, You allow yourself to experience it as it appears. You talk to someone, and instead of analyzing every detail, you stay inside the interaction. You feel something, and instead of questioning its validity, you let it exist fully before stepping back to reflect on it. This does not mean abandoning thought. It means changing its role. Thought becomes something that follows experience, not something that replaces it. Doubt becomes something you use when needed, not something you live inside constantly. And when that shift happens, something begins to return. The sense of immediacy, the feeling of being directly connected to what is happening, the ability to be present without always stepping outside yourself. You're still capable of questioning, still capable of thinking deeply, but you're no longer trapped in that constant distance. You're not always trying to prove the world before you can live in it. You're already inside it, and that changes everything. Because the problem Descartes started was never just about knowledge. It was about where you stand in relation to your own experience. If you always stand outside it, trying to confirm it, life will continue to feel slightly distant, slightly uncertain, slightly unresolved. But if you allow yourself to stand inside it, even without perfect certainty, something else becomes possible. You stop trying to fix the gap. And in doing that, the gap begins to lose its hold on you.